Good morning and happy Sabbath. Before we continue, I would like us to have a short prayer, and we will go into our topic. Dear Jesus, we thank you for the opportunity to be here this morning. We thank you for your blessings, for your mercy, for your kindness toward us throughout the whole year. As we wrap up the last Sabbath of this year, we ask for you to forgive us in things we may have forgotten to ask forgiveness. And we also to help us in our lives, in our personal lives, to be able to make a decision for the new year to live closer with you. Be with the people that are not able to come today. We ask for you to guide us and protect us. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Trusting God's plan for you. So this is the topic for today. And I figured it's the end of the year and the beginning of a new one. And it's a good time to maybe review some things, although I'm not going to go to the overall review. What happened in 2024? There are so many things happened. But there is a topic that's kind of interesting, and I think it's going to be able to give us kind of clues for the next year, how we should look at things, ignoring everything else that happened in our relationship with God. So trusting God's plan for you. It's a topic that it's very broad, but I'm gonna try to share maybe three important things, and we will see them in a bit. Before that, I wanted to go into the beginning of the year. Usually people make resolutions, what they want to do. They make plans, and that's always been like a good thing. Studies have been done, and one of these studies I found is a very good one, which is really confirms everything of all the rest of the studies had done on resolutions, New Year resolutions. This is Ohio State University, and it says that 9% of Americans that make resolutions complete them. Only 9%. That's a New Year resolution. So only 9% continue to follow. 23% of the people quit their resolutions by the end of the first week. That's 1/4. That shows you how strong we are in making resolutions, saying, I'm going to do it. And it's not a bad thing to say it. Even if you say it every day, I don't know how these 23% of people acted, but that's almost 1/4. And 43% quit by the end of January. So that's not really reassuring when you look at it. It's like, so till the end of January, almost 50% of people have given up. And they'll say, oh, it's going to go the way I've been doing it. There is another, so they started looking at different studies and different studies on goal settings and plans. And these are the 4 important points you could find in that actually work. So if you want to make notes, or if you want to make a picture of this slide, and I'm going to tell you a few details about why these 4 important points. I mean, if you follow these, they promise you're going to be part of the 9%. You're going to be part of the 9% that continue. And I'm not sure how it's in other countries, but I'm sure they're the same. We're all humans. I would say even if you have to make any comparison of people being more motivated and more ambitious, those should be Americans. So I'm thinking the rest of the country is probably going to do worse. But anyway, still 9% is not a big deal. So number 1, if you want your goals to succeed and your plans to pass the January end, is goals should start at the time of change or need for change. So if you practically, they say what do we have here saying in America? If it ain't broken, don't fix it, right? There usually people say that. Maybe some people try to make an excuse not to do things, not to fix things that are already, become bad. But this is one of the things. So goals should start at the time of change, which New Year is a time of change, kind of. It's okay if you want to make a change. The New Year, it's okay. So make goals, write them, expect obstacles. So that's the other thing is most people give up because there are obstacles. So what the study says, no matter how small or straightforward the goal is, there is always a chance for an obstacle. To keep your optimism, identify obstacles and create plans to avoid barriers. This will reduce the possibility of setbacks or failure. So in my previous job, the bosses, the managers kind of hired, they were saying, if you say, but we have this roadblock, if you say the team, comes up and we have this roadblock and we don't know how to pass it, and they'll say, they don't want negativity. They say, you don't speak in the negative terms. It's only challenges and opportunities. So there is no roadblocks, it's challenges and opportunity. So this is just a challenge. Let's see how we're going to fix it. Data shows that if you set challenging goals, you will be motivated to reach them. So number 3, set goals into challenging, measured but smaller chunks. And why is this important? Maybe you've heard the saying, some people say there was some kind of Chinese saying, the road of 1,000 miles, start with one step. I think that's a Chinese kind of proverb. And I know the Indians have another one. They say, how do you lead an elephant? Oh, okay. It may not be Indians because I think that's kind of sacred animal, right? So it shouldn't be Indians, maybe someone else. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. I mean, you can swallow it, obviously. So smaller chunks, challenging. So why? Because there has to be some challenge. It has to be short in duration. And when you do it, then you feel kind of motivated, because they say every time we accomplish something, that's neuroscientists in our area, they say it releases some brain chemicals that actually motivate you and you feel better. And these brain chemicals are almost the same that people that are drug addicts take. So, but when you take drugs, you become all lumpy. Doesn't do anything to you. But when you actually achieve something, that motivates you to achieve another one, and you're practically becoming on drugs. Well, your own brain releasing drugs because you're accomplishing something. So these are very good things. I mean, I am kind of keeping them for myself. And number 4 is accountability. They say studies show that people who not only write their goals, so writing them, but set up a way to be accountable for them, will be twice as likely to achieve them, which is practically the plan becomes the goal settings and the steps, and these challenging measured small chunks help you. It's kind of becoming accounting, but sometimes it's okay to be another person. That's why people work in teams, at least in 2. And if you remember, even in the Bible, Jesus sent them 2 by 2, because if you send them 1 by 1, they may, what happened with Jonah? He was like, I'm going home. So 2 by 2 works better. But it's also, I also found it was very interesting. If you watch TV shows in different places, you see that there was a TV show years ago about people losing weight. I forgot the name. The Big Loser. The Biggest Loser. So The Biggest Loser, they had an accountability. I mean, they said supposedly someone went to people's houses participating and checking their fridge. So because they tried to lose weight. So this is kind of another way. If someone is accountable, it's a little bit playing on the shame and guilt thing, which nowadays it's a no-no. Nowadays nobody should be shamed, guilty. But I think that's kind of accountability in a sense. It shouldn't be that way, of course, but it's an idea that works. Accountability is more for motivating the person. So transferring this in our Christian life, what can motivate us? It's very interesting that when you look through the Bible and you look through different verses, and we're going to look some very popular verses that are always interesting to kind of maybe read at the new year, at the beginning of the year. And that's my goal today. So the number one point is we have to look at the how can decision making, personal choices, because really that's what makes a difference when you're making a plan, when trying to set up a goal. We have to look at always in the context of we as Christians and the Bible and God Himself. We believe in a living God, so He's supposed to help us, so we are not part of the 81% of people that has given up. So there is a very big kind of a mix of ideas that go into the free will, personal choices, and God's sovereignty over our decisions. So this is a very intricate relationships. And if we look through the Bible, we see that God has given us the power of choice. But at the same time, when you look at it, the sovereignty of God, you have to understand and realize that God deserves the right to overrule anything because He's controlling the universe. So some people actually argue, some theologians, some people call them the big wigs. The big wigs, the big hats, people with lots of degrees, they need to argue that there isn't really a free will because if God can overrule it, that's not. But we have to understand that God also says in several places that His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. Isn't that what the song was about? That the way God is, you have to realize that we are these tiny little humans living in this 3D environment on Earth. We can barely reach the moon and travel to the moon with all the technologies that we have. So we still have to understand that God is way bigger than what we are. So one of the texts was saying that the Bible portrays God as exercising complete control over all events. I don't have that verse, but one of the verses is, I put it in my notes, is Isaiah 46:10, which says, "My purpose will stand, and I will do all that I please." And we know that emphasizing that God is, whatever His purpose has decided, it will stand. It doesn't mean that He will overrule our free will, but He will navigate it in certain ways that He's, like what it says, whatever He pleases, He will do it. Proverbs 16:9, we're going to look at it a little later, that humans plan their course, in their hearts human plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. Again, it says that God is the one that in a more personal level can lead us to fulfill decisions and our free will and choices that we make. And how do we make choices? I like I put on verses here from Deuteronomy chapter 30, and the whole chapter here, it's kind of Moses toward the end of his time. He's bringing again the blessings and the curses, and you can see these two verses are very interesting. "I call heaven and earth as witnesses today against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose life, that both you and your descendants may live, that you may love the Lord your God, that you may obey His voice, and that you may cling to Him, for He is your life and the length of your days, and that you may dwell in the land which the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give them." So you can even see here that God has given us choices. And it says that therefore choose life, both you and your descendants. But it's also kind of outlining that your choices will also have to be, if you are following God, and of course this is given to God's people, it says that you may love the Lord your God, that you may obey His voice, and that you may cling to Him, for He is your life and the length of your days. So it's, in a sense, your choices inevitably as a people of God, believers in the Lord, have to bring you closer to God. You have to become more in love with Him, and as a reward, He will extend your days. He will make your life better. He will bless you. He will prosper you. He will give you the land that He has given them. And you can find a lot of, I only choose these two, but There was another verse that I was um, looking in Joshua 24:15 also. Joshua there encourages them. It says, choose for yourself this day whom you will serve. And again, it gives you the kind of responsibility for choosing. But also, if you look further in the verses, you will see that it's also good and evil. It's always, you have to understand that that's kind of the idea. Every new year and every time you make a plan, there is always a good or a bad. Sometimes we don't know. That's why we have to follow God's advice and to be able to choose the good instead of the bad, because sometimes we don't know what the consequences will be. Jeremiah 29:11 is one of the verses that's always given, and it's a very kind of common verse, although um, you can see that it doesn't always mean that it's going to be um, a blessing. So I say, for I know the thoughts that I think toward you, says the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you a future and a hope. And 12 and 13, then you will call upon me and go and pray to me, and I will listen to you, and you will seek me and find me when you search for me with all your heart. And sometimes we try to use this verse, it's kind of for only a specific, for a blessing, like that it's going to be a blessing for everything. But if you, I mean, of course, you can apply it in that way. Of course, when you look at God, He's always want to bless His children. But you have to look at the context in which this verse was given. If you remember, that was Jeremiah was writing at the time when the Israelites was going into the 70 year of captivity in Babylon. And that wasn't a good thing when you think about it. And the reason they were sent into Babylon is because they were rejecting God for hundreds of years before that. First, there was idolatry. It started since the death of Solomon, and Solomon introduced all the idols. They continued to follow. They continued even to burn their children on the altars of other gods. The leaders were that were leading in the temple. They were perverting the service. The kings were bent on power and bloodshed to the point that it was terrible. And if you remember, the 70 years was given because 70 Sabbaths were not kept. And if you calculate every 7th year, that was from the Leviticus, they had to let the land rest, so no work. And that was also, they have to trust for that year that God's going to provide them. The 7th year, no crops, no planting, no sowing, no reaping. But for 70, if that was given, and you can find that in Chronicles, I don't have exact verses, but that means at least 490 years before that, 70 by 7, they have not kept the land rest. But of course, it wasn't just because of the Sabbath, the 7th year Sabbath for the land that they didn't keep. It was all the rest of the things. So if you look at the context, you would see that how can you consider that as a blessing when they're taking you in captivity, you're being a slave in Babylon, and then Jeremiah say, I know the thoughts that I think toward you, thoughts of peace and not of evil. I mean, come on, if I'm just being held in shackles, it's like, give me a break, I will say to the prophet. But when you think about it later, God actually blessed them. They had land, and if you look at through their experience, even in Egypt, when they were slaves, they were at some point after Joseph was there, they were given land. I mean, the land of Goshen was there. Yeah, the evil Pharaoh that it came in the last years before Moses, took them out, he was kind of forcing them to work extra, to pick up straw, to make bricks and all these other things. But before that, they were slaves, but they were blessed. They have their own, they have houses, they had land, they have planted. And remember later, one of the plagues that were actually darkness, it didn't come upon them. The land of Goshen was bright. So the same thing happened in the 70 years in Babylon. They had land. It may not have been very rich, but they had enough. So when you look at it in the context, you will see that God is actually still willing to bless you. And it's a very interesting verses here in Jeremiah. We could do a lot of story around it, just around it. But you could see is like, for me, why it's important, because like if you're moving toward the new year and if you're seeing, for example, curses coming upon the land, you have to look at the context of the years before that. And some people say things are becoming bad and things like that, of course. But sometimes the things that are happening now and maybe happening next year, they are the consequences of bad decisions done before that. And that's what was happening to the Israelites. And that's why I love this verse, because even then, I know the thoughts that I think towards you, says the Lord, thoughts of peace. And what's the result? If you come to me and pray to me, he says, I will listen to you, and you will seek me and find me. So one of the things of this first section of decision making and God's things and trusting God in our life is pray to the Lord, and he will change us. And we'll go through other verses. 1 Corinthians 13:12. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know just as I also am known. And 1 Corinthians 1:25 also, because the foolishness of God is wiser than man, and the weakness of God is stronger than man. Again, we see here the sovereignty of God and our limited understanding. So Corinthians 13:12, our limited understanding. And this is the chapter of the love chapter, 1 Corinthians 13. Even there, Paul says that we do not see well. We as humans is not being given to know everything in the future. And I like 1 Corinthians 1:25, that even the foolishness of God, I mean, even if you think something looks like a foolishness, is actually wiser than what our decisions could be. And I like here, I read a very interesting story. It's kind of good about the not seeing well, seeing dimly. It's like you're seeing fuzzy and blurry and not seeing well. And I recently, my son was doing some kind of project for his classes about self-driving cars, and I found this very interesting story about the first recorded self-driving car crash, and it happened to Rafaela Vasquez. She was 44, and an electric taxi driver was behind the wheel of the car. And that was a Volvo XC90. It was equipped with the self-driving technology. And the Uber company tested that 2-3 months before that. It considered it working. They were driving on the streets of Tempe, Arizona. And what happened is she hit a person. And what they start reviewing, it was night. In the evening, of course, maybe there was some residual lighting on the streets, but she had become the first human driver to fail to prevent an imperfect self-driving vehicle from killing a pedestrian. And so when they just look at the logs of the computers and the self-driving equipment and the cameras, it noted that the vehicle's radar system registered the pedestrian's body as she crossed the street only 6 seconds prior to the impact, and due to the computer programming. And what happened is that the computer registered the common urban phenomenon. They also call it the human being walking alongside a bicycle instead of riding it. And at first it registered the person as an unknown object, then as a car, then as a bicycle, and it's trying to calculate, stopping distance, slowing down, and it actually couldn't make a decision. And that has always been, even till today, they're still teaching self-driving cars. And to me, it's very interesting how the computer didn't have an idea that a human walking next to a bicycle, what to consider it, how to register it. So it's very interesting to me, is we as humans, we're also not seeing things well, especially in our Christian life. I'm not saying that we are that bad, because a human eye can actually distinguish. But to me, teaching those, AI and self-driving equipment how to perceive things, it's almost like you're teaching a child there with infant stage. And it's very interesting to me how we as such may not perceive things the same way that God is seeing them. So Proverbs 16:9, we talk, a man's heart plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. We already mentioned it. It's like our planning is different than what God sees. Again, our vision, our understanding, We are not given the ability to see the future. It's always best to go with the Lord and ask the Lord to direct our steps. That's the way to have a better judgment, and even if He has to prevent us of doing something, not to do it. Number two, divine guidance in decision making. So number two, it's kind of overlapping a little bit with the number one, with the sovereignty of God and what we perceive and what we cannot see. So how do we do divine? How do we use the divine guidance in decision making? I mean, we saw in some of the other verses, and we're going to read a few more. Proverbs has a lot in those, but it's very interesting to know that having wisdom from God, it's better. And James 1:5 and Proverbs 19:21 are very good verses. Proverbs 19:21, there are many plans in man's heart, nevertheless, the Lord's counsel that will stand. So you can have a lot of plans for the next year. You can make your plans with these 4 steps that we said, but nevertheless, counsel with the Lord is that will stand. And James 1:5 gives us what we need. James talks a lot in his epistle and his writing about wisdom. So it's James 1:5 is, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. And it's a very good promise. If you want to receive God's promises, this is a good one to get. So always look for wisdom. God will give it to you. And if you, I remember a story, if you think about it, like even Apostle Paul, when he was preaching and trying to go and establish churches, came to mind the story with the Macedonian call, when they were trying to go to Bithynia, I forgot, it was in different cities, and it says the Holy Spirit forbid them, they did not let them, and then he sees in a vision while he sleeps this Macedonian, and he says, just come and help us, nothing else. And then they say, okay, we are going to Macedonia, and that's how it works. So God's counsels will stand, and sometimes in Paul's way, he can prevent you from going into a venture that is not very good. And I like a story that I've read, is very interesting, the tale of Tom Poor. And I don't know if it's a real story, but it's like sounds very realistic. And Tom Poor, that was the name of the guy. It says, it's very interesting. I'm going to read a few portions of it. Always vowed to never live up to his namesake. And it sounds like very realistic. The 7th son of an iron maker, Tom spent years building his successful steel manufacturing company. His success allowed him to provide a lifestyle for his wife and 2 children, and no one in the Poor family, that's their name, had ever had any issues. So his company has 135 employees, and his 2 children started growing up, 2 sons started getting more responsibility in the business. The business was growing, but it's very interesting. Just before his 70th birthday, he made a startling announcement that he wants to sell the company. So a larger steel company offered him $15 million, and he decided, oh, that's a very good chunk of money. I'm going to take it. And he assured his employees and children that their jobs were safe because the buyer, had affirmed that. And he assumed that his 15 million is going to be good to provide for him, since before that he allowed himself salary from the company about $500,000. So he said he had a very good life with $500,000 yearly salary for himself. But before the deal went through, Tom's children told him that they had expected to run the company. And when he retires, and they've been training hard, they've been taking more responsibility. But what happens to Tom Poor? He made a bad decision. He says, I built this business into what's today, and I have earned the right to make decisions. So if I want to sell it, I'm going to sell it. And as the sale date approaches, he realized that the people just don't like that whole decision. His 2 sons actually leave, go to work they start their own company. Some of the great employees start leaving. The person that offered 15 million said, oh, no, if you're going to sell this business, your key employees are leaving. the price, you're not gonna get 15 million. And Tom tried to renegotiate him, trying to call his employees, raise their salary, keep them to stay. And of course, some stayed, but at some point, the original buyer pulled the offer, and Tom now doesn't have this big offer of 15 million. And it says that Tom ended up selling the business at the age of 75. So this continued for 5 years for 3 million. Consider, from 15 to 3 million, and after taxes, he took home just over $1 million, with his family refusing to talk to him and barely enough to survive on his own. After a year of poor health, Tom was forced to re-enter the workforce at the company he had sold just a year earlier. So at 76, now he applies for a job at his company that he owned. Talk about really bad decisions. And here he says, despite his promises to himself, Tom Poor ended his life living up to his namesake. So it's a very good example for me to see that plans, everybody can have good plans, like the verse says. And if you lack wisdom, just ask from the Lord. James 3:17 actually kind of affirms a little bit the story. But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality, without hypocrisy. Do you think that Mr. Tompur had that wisdom? I don't think so. I mean, I don't think he even had any of these. So even to his own family, I mean, they stopped talking to him. So Proverbs 3:5 and 6, also good verse. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your path. Again, we have a affirmation. If you trust in the Lord and you don't lean too much on your own understanding, it's almost like, to me, this verse, when I always read it, even when I was younger, it meant to me is like, don't think yourself too smart. You may be smart, but just don't try to be too smart. Acknowledge God and let God lead you. And number 3, the last point, is cooperation in God's plan. And now I took this from a picture. You can see a hashtag there. God needs my cooperation to fulfill his plan in my life. So it's not going to work if you just ask God for wisdom, but you do not want to cooperate. It's like you ask for wisdom, God gives it to you. You ask for you to bless your plans, whatever your plans are for the next year, but then you go, you do your own thing. Because, I mean, let's be honest, most of us do that. Very often. We say, well, I prayed, and then go and do your own thing. Well, that's really what this part is about. And I got the verses here from 1 Corinthians 3:9-11. For we are God's fellow workers, and you're God's field. You're God's building, according to the grace of God which was given to me. As a wise master builder, I have laid the foundation, and another builds on it. But let each one take heed how he builds on it. For no other foundation can anyone lay than that which is laid, which is Jesus Christ. So again, you see kind of bigger picture here. It's not just about us. Here it talks about the building, that we are fellow workers, and we know what God is building. We know plan of salvation is he salves us individually, but he wants us also to fit in his church, in his family. He's coming to get his bride, which is not just one person. He's getting all of us in the family of God. So we have to participate, and we inevitably will participate in God's building. And the last verse I have is Romans 8:28. It's also very popular. We know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are the called according to his purpose. These are very good verses. Romans 8:28, and toward the end of 8:39, I believe, that God cannot, anything that will not take us away from his hand. These are wonderful verses if you want to read them for yourself. But here is reminded me when I was putting these verses, the story of Joseph. And we're not going to go into it. Just think about it, how all things work together. And I didn't put it, verse Genesis 50:20, where he says that his brothers did evil, and uh, and he said, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." You can see, and why this story is always comes up in the Bible is not just because it's a long story, but it's a long in the human life perspective. When you look at it, and I kind of tried to calculate it, I went through different verses. It says he was taken a slave at the age of 17 years old, was sold into slavery. Then he was at Potiphar. Then he went. He was accused of, uh, pulling his wife's robe, going into jail. So when actually with the famine and everything, it comes like to 39 years old when he actually met his brothers again, because it was 7 years of plenty, and then the 7 years of first year of famine they didn't come, the second, because the first year, they still have something saved, but second year of famine. So if you calculate, he was about 39 years old. So that approximates, I mean, it's approximate kind of 22 years. This whole story, and if you look Romans 8:28, all things work together for good. My question for me is, can you believe it? I mean, 22 years? That really requires faith. So a conclusion, for a conclusion. So 3 points: the relationship kind of going between our decision making and God's plan is really, as a Christian, you have to choose to trust God's plan and always know that God's plan is not what you actually see. We see, darkly. We may not see everything. So for the next year, all the decisions that you make, all the plans that you want to put together, I wish that you uh, don't do your own thing. You ask God for wisdom even while you're making your plans, and even during each step of your plans or what you want to achieve, whatever is ahead, ask the Lord and believe. Like Romans 8:28 says, that all things work together and nothing will separate us from the love of God. No height, no depth, no. We have to go back to the verse. I don't have it memorized, but believe that God will work it at the end. And I wish for you to be part of the 9% of Americans that actually all the plans that they've had continue to the next year, and to the next, and to the next. Amen. We will have a song to finish.
For our closing song, please stand. Hymn number 500.